When the river got up, the water was in our front yard. That's how close I was.
What kind of memories do you have of that?
All of my memories are fond. I get a little emotional.
It's been a half century, but emotions still run high for residents who were displaced when the U.S. Congress made the Buffalo River America's first national river.
Some people wasn't allowed to stay, live out their life, and taking whole farms. That's when people begin to get upset. All the promises was broken.
You know, promise you this and promise you that, and tell you how much better it was going to be. And nah, it was all a big lie. Everything was a big lie. Everything was a big lie. All they wanted was the land.
Welcome to AgriCulture, life stories from the farm, a podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau. I'm Chad Hoot. A new discussion about redesignating the Buffalo River has North Arkansas residents on edge and remembering 1972. Talks of turning the national river into a national park preserve to attract more visitors made headlines last fall and sparked lots of lively discussion. Older residents of the 4 rural counties where the 135-mile river flows haven't forgotten what happened here a half century ago and seem more than a little concerned about the new talks. I recently got to visit with 2 longtime Searcy County residents, Miss Bonnie Cash Glidewell, who lived on the banks of the Buffalo growing up near the small St. Joe community, and Mr. Randy Clark from nearby Marshall. The 70-year-old Clark and I visited while walking on a gravel bar along the river.
First of all, tell me why so many people up here are, what would the word be, nervous?
Yeah, nervous. Anytime you talk about the river, park, and land, people get nervous from what is taking place with the original national park coming in 1972. I was 9-year-old when I first heard of the river, started talking about damming. Well, people decided that wouldn't be the right course because it would take all their land. So they decided that maybe a national river, small right-of-way along the river, all the access stay the same. People would be able to still farm and those things. As time comes, it becomes a national river in 72, and then they start taking the land, buying the land, taking the land. And when people seen how much they was taking whole farms, some people wasn't allowed to stay, live out their life, and that's when people begin to get upset. All the promises was broken, you might say. So
I'm looking at this right over here, those bubbles and that white stuff on top. Where are we and what are we looking at?
Well, we're here at Grinders Ferry, just below 65. That would be some kind of water that's got in from somewhere that caused it to foam up like that. If it was summertime, I would tell you that it probably would come from humans, but that is just something that wasn't there in 1972. My experience with Buffalo River, if we was looking at it in 1972, you could see the bottom when you was floating it. You wouldn't see this scum of algae on the rocks. You see the stuff there, and you still see that foam. I don't know.
It looks like a commode in the men's room. Somebody just walked out of it and didn't flush.
Didn't flush, and it looks like the paper's with it. I mean, years ago, before they took it, we got to remember there was cattle on this river, and it wasn't like this.
Now we're 50 years later, and there's talk about doing something different.
Yeah, and in the meetings I've been to, nobody has been given a plan by these outside groups. Here it is, a river where we live, but outside people is talking about what they want to do to the river, and we know that if they do anything, it's going to affect the ability for us to survive or farm or live here or whatever changes would be made. I mean, there are just so many things that it's negative that I see, and I just don't see it any more increase to it would be possible to handle itself. I don't think the river can take on any more growth, is what I think.
The Buffalo was designated as America's first national river on March the 1st, 1972. The deal included the National Park Service acquiring almost 100,000 acres of land around the river. There was a lot of debate leading up to that redesignation and lots of hostility afterwards.
I have nothing good to say about it, and never will have.
Bonnie Cash Glidewell lives west of the St. Joe community, down toward the Buffalo River on North Woolham Road. When the paved road turns to gravel, there are breathtaking scenic views of the Ozark Mountains. An abundance of wildlife can be spotted too. Elk, white-tailed deer, turkey, black bear, and occasionally a mountain lion will pass through. A nice house on the hill, surrounded by grand scenery, is where Glidewell lives. But it's not her home, not the place where she grew up. That's down in the valley, on the banks of the Buffalo.
What was it like growing up on the river? What kind of memories do you have?
All of my memories are fond.
Yeah.
I get a little emotional. We had the best life. We didn't have nothing. We had land and we had cattle. We had what everybody else had on the river. We had a way to make a living. And my mother died in '67, and our house burnt right after my grandpa died. So it was in that time when the park was coming in and trying to, buy the land, and my dad was faced with raising 8 kids with no mother, and his dad had died. Our house had burnt, and he, it was a big stress on him. I don't know how he did it. I really don't. He was a pretty strong man.
So the park, about the time, here comes the...
Yep, here comes the park, and we had backslappers, and we had handshakers, and wheeler dealers, and we're going to do this for you, and we're going to do that for you, and it was just overwhelming to my dad. I remember that they had a guy, and he was the wheeler dealer for the park. Promise you this and promise you that, and tell you how much better it was going to be, and it was all a big lie. Everything was a big lie. All they wanted was the land. And he was the wheeler dealer, and he would say, well, Lance, we're going to give you this for it. And if you don't take this, it probably go down. And they used that tactic on everybody up and down the river.
What did your dad do?
Well, he held off, and back then they had meetings, but this was such a rural area, there was not telephones for a long, long time. So by the time that the word got out about the meetings was over, and they didn't want you to know what they were doing.
So eventually your dad did what with the land?
Eventually he sold it, but he knew he had to sell it. He knew it was going to be, they were going to take it. He knew that they were going to take it, and he was afraid. He was trying to get enough to where he might be able to go get another farm somewhere. But that didn't happen.
That's Miss Bonnie Cash Glidewell of St. Joe. She was one of about 1,200 concerned residents who turned out in late October for a meeting at Jasper High School in nearby Newton County. They had just learned about the possible new redesignation plan for the river. Redesignating the Buffalo from a national river to a national park and preserve will require new legislation. But if it's passed, federal authority over property in the Buffalo River's watershed could expand, including land where many locals still live and farm.
It's 50 years later, and now you got a new movement, at least discussions.
Absolutely disgusting, but it's not surprising. It's a constant battle here to keep what is rightfully yours. I inherited this side. I had on that side of the road. but I inherited this side from my dad
When was that?
in 2012. As soon as that deed got transferred over into my name, I got a phone call wanting me to give them a buffer zone along the river. And so I told them, no, I will not give you anything ever, ever. Nothing that I have am I going to give. No right-of-ways, no buffer zones, nothing. You have ruined my whole family's livelihood. It's a constant fight. It's a constant fight to live here.
No one can understand how you feel, the sentimentality and the meaning and the heritage of it for you. People who haven't ever had land, haven't had grandparents.
This land on this park, my grandpa was 84 when he died, and his dad owned some of it. He was here from the time he was born in 1884. Before that, his dad was here. They died down there. My mother died right down there at Woolham. My grandpa, he had a stroke right down there at Woolham. His brother died under a tree up Richland Valley. I mean, it's not just the land, it's the heritage, it's the memories. They paid a dear price to get this land. Those people were good, hard-working people, and we drank the water out of the river for years and years. That was our only water source. I wouldn't even eat a fish out of it now. It just went from the most pristine, beautiful place you ever saw, with just everywhere you looked was beauty. And everywhere you look now, you see toilet paper. If you don't go down there before or middle of June, really, the water's pretty good. But starting around 1st to middle of June, the water stinks. You can't put that many people on there. And them, excuse my language, crapping and peeing in it, because that's all they do. And throw their beer cans in it, and their pop cans, and their trash. You might get by with peeing in it just a little bit, but you don't want 2 million people peeing in it.
There are many who have an interest in the future of the Buffalo River. Big proponents of outdoor adventure tourism reportedly intend to build lodges and hotels, trails, and zip lines on the land. Arkansas Farm Bureau passed policy in November opposing the changing of the name, designation, or expansion of the Buffalo National River and any further negative impact on the agricultural lands or infringement on private land ownership and its use within the Buffalo National River watershed. I want to thank Miss Bonnie Cash Glidewell for sharing her heart at the kitchen table of her beautiful home on the hill, and Mr. Randy Clark for walking along with me on the banks of the Buffalo River. We'll discuss more of the Buffalo River's past and future next week when we head upstream to talk with the Tinsley family in Boone County.
Do you want someone to come take your home? Do you want somebody to come in and tell you that you shouldn't live here anymore, that I want it, and you're gonna move, and I don't care what you say about it. You have no rights in it.
That's next time on AgriCulture, Life Stories from the Farm.
Whenever they come in and took the river, they killed communities. Whole communities were gone. People's lives were changed so much that I've always said I've only been homesick one time in my life, but it's lasted 51 years. They want to make you so mentally tired fighting them that you leave.
Welcome to AgriCulture, Life Stories from the Farm, a podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau. I'm Chad Hooten. The Buffalo River flows more than 150 miles through the Ozark Mountains, winding its way through 4 counties of North Arkansas. It's one of the more beautiful places in the country, with multicolored bluffs, trees, and wildlife, including lots of deer and the reintroduced elk. No surprise, the Buffalo was designated as America's first national river in the spring of 1972. But the redesignation of the land along the Buffalo displaced about 2,000 farmers and residents. Some of those families' resentment runs deeper than the highest of the Buffalo's bluffs. And when news broke late last fall that another redesignation of the river could make it a national park or preserve, it was like ripping a bandage off a 50-year-old wound for the former residents of the river. The Tinsley family was one of those.
I heard about it 3 or 4 months ago, maybe, when they first started. I just know that these people are just wanting to come in and just snatch their homes from them, their way of life. And it's sad.
They need to leave it alone, leave the people alone. They want to make it a preserve, change it from a national river, which it should have never been a national river. It was pure and pristine is the reason they took it.
I recently drove 20 miles north of the river to Boone County, where the Tinsleys now live. I turned off Highway 7 north onto San Sing Hollow Road, then hit a gravel road called Coweta Falls before easing down a long, narrow driveway bordered by steep wooded hills and some pasture before arriving at Rick Tinsley's farmhouse. It's about midway between Bergman and Harrison, and it's the house where the Tinsleys moved just 2 days before Christmas in 1972. 74-year-old Rick and his wife Shirley came out on the front porch to give me a country folk welcome. Inside, we were joined at the kitchen table by Rick's 3 siblings, Donna Miller, Sam Tinsley, and Ronnie Tinsley. They shared about growing up on what they called the old home place. It was a beautiful spot with a creek that fed the nearby Buffalo River, right near the Irby community. Rick, the oldest of the siblings, was 20 when the family left their beloved home place. A little more than 50 years later, he shared some details of that move, but was especially just thankful to finally be able to vent about what happened.
Mom and Dad was just tired of it. They just wore out, wasn't they, Rick?
Yes.
They were wore out. People get wore out from just being pushed.
They knew it was going to happen, and they were just ready to get out of it, because that eminent domain thing.
And it was stressful for and it's still stressful.
My grandmother had lived over there. We moved over here, and it wasn't long after we moved over here that her mental capacity declined really fast after we moved over here. She wanted to go home, and this was not home.
Donna, what would you say to people who might be in favor of another redesignation of the river as a lifelong resident here?
Do you want someone to come take your home? Do you want somebody to come in and tell you that you shouldn't live here anymore, that I want it, and you're going to move, and I don't care what you say about it. You're going to do what I tell you to. You have no rights in this.
You guys, y'all are already gone.
Right.
For y'all, you lost your spot on the river 50 years ago.
Right.
Why are you guys talking to me?
I guess I'm against the redesignation of the river because it's going to open up more possibilities for people. Anything to slow down the rich and government and the greed.
You was asking why we were willing to do this. Well, it's kind of nice that somebody will listen to the people that live there. You hear about all the people, the fight that went on, but there's never anything about the people that gave up their way of life. I mean, I can understand at this point, maybe they want to preserve the river, but that's all you hear about. You hear about the politicians that fought so hard, but you don't hear anything about the people that it changed their life forever, that they sacrificed, the thing. You don't hear that. So it's kind of, you kind of give us a way of expressing our feelings.
You got a little emotional there. Nobody listened to the landowners back then?
No, and haven't since. And like I say, this is one reason that we're glad you did this, because our feelings were never heard. It was maybe 2,000 people is going to be
Uprooted.
Uprooted, you know. Well, that's nothing. Those people should be glad to uproot that for us. And they were so ruthless. I think if they had been a little more open with us and a little more fair, you know, it would have been better for us, you know. But it was very ruthless, and you people should be proud to give your land up.
That's Rick Tinsley. He now lives in the farmhouse his parents built and moved into in 1972, when their land and home near the Buffalo River was redesignated as federal land. One of Rick's younger brothers, Sam Tinsley, is kind of fiery, and he was one of about 1,200 people who attended a public meeting last October in Jasper. Residents from the region turned out in force after learning of another possible redesignation of the river. Sam says, based on history, any changes or redesignation of the land will not help its current citizens.
One meeting that I went to several years ago, they were trying to blame the people in southern Boone County, farmers, for polluting the river. I said, there's a million people at that time visiting the river, and there's no place to get out on the bank. It's all growed up. The fields are growed up. So they just go up on the gravel bar and take a crap, take a leak, and then the government, they come in and take a water sample on the river when the river's on a rise. And I told them, I said, when you flush the toilet, you got a sudden flush of water, and you take the water sample in. Well, that picks all that crap up, you know, and if you took 1/3 of the people that took crap or leak on the gravel bar, that's 330,000 people, and that was the time was probably as big as any city in the state of Arkansas, flushing a toilet.
So they took the water samples for testing kind of right after a flash flood?
Yeah. They want to blame the farmer. They took all the chickens, all the goats, all the cattle, all the hogs, all the horses off of the river because it was so pristine, and the only thing they brought in was humans. And if they get what they're wanting now, they want to actually take Newton County. The federal government doesn't pay property tax. So whenever they took all those farms and all moved everybody off the river, the counties lost tax revenue that went to sheriffs, education, the schools and everything, you know.
You know, they don't know the trials and the issues of being a farmer. They think that you go to Walmart's or you go to the grocery store and it's there. They don't know where it comes from.
Don't you know hamburger comes from McDonald's?
Oh, well, yeah, and chicken nuggets, you know. And that's what I was going to say is they have absolutely no idea.
This is AgriCulture, a podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau. I'm Chad Hooten, and you're listening to a conversation I had with the Tinsley siblings at Rick Tinsley's home in North Arkansas. They were uprooted as youths when a redesignation of the Buffalo River required their parents to sell their home in the river's watershed. And they're concerned something similar could happen to others in the area again.
We didn't think anything. I graduated in 1967 from Jasper. We didn't really hear, I guess maybe 65 or 66. We heard maybe a little bit about it, but we just didn't think that this can't possible. They can't come in here and take our land that my dad, my grandpa, my great-grandpa had, you know. But then it was like me and you and my brother Donna playing basketball against Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, they talk about the fight for the Buffalo. There was no fight. They had every advantage, had money and time. We didn't know this, but probably they had been surveying this for probably 5 or 6 years. They knew what they were going to do to move us out. It was very traumatic. On what way it's designated now to, you know, talking about the making a national park. The majority of the people probably in Northwest Arkansas, in any place that's not on the river, is what they want. I mean, the money that's available will influence them to do that. And then the other people are going to buy. You know, if you have a place that's worth $100,000, the other people with money will come in there and they can give you $1 million. You know, because it's nothing to them.
Yeah.
And they'll buy the land up that's around the park. I think that's what you'd have to worry about in this. It's the moneyed folks that's going to buy the land up that borders the park.
Dad and Mom didn't have no choice. They had to sell. Eminent domain.
Yeah.
Money's not everything, If you can hold on to your place without being overtook by the greedy people that's willing to buy your place and then let it be destroyed, then that's your problem, I guess. But you got to think about your neighbors and all this watershed that they want to take. That will affect farmers. I don't care if you got a goat, one goat, or 1,000 head of cattle, or one cow. You're going to be affected. And the people around that watershed, get ready for regulations. Farmers are the most regulated people in this country. And people don't realize without the farmer, there would be no life, period. The more people, they want to bring in more people here. That's what their whole game is about, bring in more people. The more land that they can control, they can come up with all these ways, bringing in more tourists. And don't let the greed, you got to stop the greed somewhere.
The Buffalo River, an absolute Arkansas treasure. But what is its future? Residents say it's been on a 50-year slide since being redesignated as a national river in 1972, and that any other changes would be devastating, not only to its beauty, but also to the people who live near it, just like the last redesignation a half-century ago. Arkansas Farm Bureau passed policy in November opposing the changing of the name, designation, or expansion of the Buffalo National River and any further negative impact on the agricultural lands or infringement on private land ownership and its use within the Buffalo National River watershed. On our next episode of AgriCulture, we'll talk with Billy Bell, a man who spent a quarter of a century working on the Buffalo River for the Park and Forest Service.
They monitor visitor impact, and whenever it gets unsustainable, then they now have to start bringing those numbers down. And the way that they'll bring those numbers down is through permitting, through closing things off, and not letting people use it the same. Do we tell the Park Service not to do their job and just bring more people and let it get loved to death, so to speak? Or do we bring more people until the Park Service does their job, and then now we have permitting in place? And my thing is not everybody can afford to buy a permit.
That's on the next episode of AgriCulture.
The thing that got my attention was, I just call it propaganda. Their propaganda, they were saying things like, to protect your right to fish, to protect your right to hunt, to protect your right to use the park, we need to change this designation. And I know as is, it's protected as is.
The Buffalo River in North Arkansas is a national treasure, designated as America's first national river a half-century ago. That designation displaced about 2,000 heartbroken residents along the river in 1972. But it didn't cost hunters and fishermen a thing. That could be changing, according to a lifelong resident who has worked on and around the river for 25 years.
The idea with the National Park and Preserve is to bring in more visitors.
Right.
Well, the National Park Service, their job, we pay them, we expect them to protect it. Their job is to protect it. And one of the ways they protect it is they monitor visitor use. They monitor visitor impact. And whenever it gets unsustainable, then they now have to start bringing those numbers down. And the way that they'll bring those numbers down is through permitting, through closing things off, and not letting people use it the same. That's their job. I can't get mad at them for it, right? Their job is to protect it.
Welcome to AgriCulture, Life Stories from the Farm, a podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau. I'm Chad Hooton. In addition to its serenity and majestic beauty, the Buffalo River has been a bountiful spot to sportsmen for centuries. 74 species of fish swim in it, including a dozen varieties that anglers chase. Hooking a smallmouth bass and trying to crank it through the Buffalo's current can be a workout and well of a time. But that, and not to mention all the great hunting on the land around the Buffalo, is free. For now. Billy Bell says that could change with the redesignation of the National River to a national park and preserve. Bell has lived all his life, more than a half century near the Buffalo. He worked on it for 25 years, including 7 with the Forestry Service and 13 years as a protection ranger for the Park Service. And before that, Bell's grandpa was a wildlife officer in the area for 40 years. Billy, I don't know that there's anyone who knows more about what's going on with the Buffalo River and the possible redesignation of the river. We've talked to a lot of people on this podcast who are ancestors, remember what happened 50 years ago, and now the possibility that that could be happening again. People are upset, concerned, scared about a possible change to the river designation.
I think the way it came to light, or at least the way I first saw it, was the survey that was put out. The survey came out, started seeing little pieces, little things pop up, little pictures, and their little watershed map, started kind of coming on my Facebook feed and different things. So I started looking into it, and the thing that got my attention was these falsehoods just kept kind of gnawing at me. I think what they were trying to do was this bait and switch. I think it was, if we don't do this, then you're going to lose your right. And like, wait a minute, it's already protected for perpetuity.
And they would say it was just about conserving this.
Conserving it. When they set up the enabling legislation in the 60s and 70s, they wrote it all the rules, all the regulations. They put in historical uses that you're allowed to do here on this river that you can't do anywhere else.
So you feel like this was positioned as you've got to do something or you're going to lose it?
You've got to do something or you're going to lose it.
Okay.
And I had lots of questions about it. And when I try to answer questions, there's also a little bit of misunderstanding, even locally. And when I say locally, not just Newton County, not just the surrounding counties, but even as far as Fayetteville. Mm-hmm. So I just started letting people understand, or talking to people and trying to get them to understand that as is, it's protected. As is,
right,
you can use it. As is, you can fish on it. As is, you can hunt on it. As is, you can camp on it.
This is the little buffalo here over here to the left of us. If I've got an Arkansas Game and Fish license, I can go fish there. I can go fish on the Buffalo National River. It's all protected.
Yep.
Understand?
Yep. No permit required by the feds.
So
if
there's a redesignation from a national river to a national park and preserve, things change a little bit.
And the way I always described it was that book, that enabling legislation, was written, and that book was sealed and put on a shelf. Upon redesignation, the possibility of that book being reopened, and now how do we manage this national park and preserve? What do we need to change to manage this national park and preserve? And now we have to think about who is over their shoulder saying what they need to do, right? Is it the users, or is it the anti-users that are over their shoulder saying, well, this is what we need to do? As is protected. Right. I think that's the most important thing that people need to know is as is protected. The designation does not protect it anymore. It actually opens up possibilities of outside influences, development and mining and other things just outside the park, right?
Why was there a survey?
I think that somebody thought they had such a grand idea that they were going to prove it to themselves and others that everybody wanted it, so they put out a survey. When you throw around the term National Park and Preserve, that's two things. That sounds like they're doubling down, like we're doubling down on protection, but we're not, right? We're opening up for other opportunities. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we're going to have to fight against if we move forward, is because there are people, because they think this National Park and Preserve is more protective when it's not. So to me, the most important thing that people need to understand is, and research, is how well protected it is now, and how, coupled with very strict protections, it's still very user-friendly. They need to educate them facts about how well protected it is, and then all the things that they're allowed to do on it, all the recreational activities that you're allowed to do on it, so that they understand that this, whatever this is they're trying to do, is not going to benefit them at all, because it's not. The chances that it's going to benefit people who can't afford to pay for a permit are slim.
No permits required now except to hunt elk, which is everywhere in Arkansas. But with the park and preserve, it's very possible that could be required, because in most national parks, permits are required.
Yep. The idea with the National Park and Preserve is to bring in more visitors.
Right.
Well, they monitor visitor impact, and whenever it gets unsustainable, then they now have to start bringing those numbers down. And the way that they'll bring those numbers down is through permitting, through closing things off, and not letting people use it the same. That's a question that I asked. I said, do we tell the Park Service not to do their job and just bring more people and let it get loved to death, so to speak? Or do we bring more people until the Park Service does their job, and then now we have permitting in place? And my thing is not everybody can afford to buy a permit.
Who did you ask these questions?
Oh, I've asked questions for several people. These were some of the things that came up in the meeting with Congressman Westerman.
Yeah. How did that go?
Very well.
Yeah.
He was very attentive. I thought it was an extremely good meeting.
What can you say? Tell us about it.
He listened very intently, and there were a lot of people with a lot of concern, and he let everybody voice their concerns with.
Was he surprised?
I don't know if he was surprised or not, but I don't know that everybody always knows what's going on the ground. I think he learned that Newton County people are extremely intelligent, extremely pleasant, and they care deeply about their place in the world.
That's lifelong Newton County resident and former Forest Service and Park Ranger Billy Bell. And this is AgriCulture, a podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau. You're listening to our third in a series on the Buffalo River, its past and future. After news broke last fall that a survey of residents had been conducted about redesignating the Buffalo National River as a national park and preserve, Billy Bell spoke to overflow concerned crowds at 2 community meetings. A few weeks later, Bell and a handful of others met with Congressman Bruce Westerman to share their thoughts and concerns. One of Bell's was that 2 other things had surfaced around the same time the survey came out. One was President Joe Biden's 30 by 30 plan to conserve 30% of the nation's land and water by the year 2030. That plan was released in January, about a month after another plan called the Explore Act was released. The Explore Act is being championed by the House Committee on Natural Resources, which is chaired by Westerman. Its mission is to, quote, improve access and transform outdoor recreation opportunities on our public land and waters.
People were seeing these things come out. So they saw the redesignation of the Buffalo River, and then they saw the Explore Act comes out. And this Explore Act the idea is to open up more public use recreational activities for people. But they say one doesn't have anything to do with the other. I don't know that they do. I can't say that they do. And then you add Biden's 30-30 initiative to it. 28% of federal lands are now in public domain, right? Public land, 28%. So 2% doesn't seem like that much. So people they worry, where's that going to come from? Well, who are they going to take it from?
Some folks down in Arkansas.
They worry because they've seen it. Now, whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know. But these people saw land,
Sure.
either bought, sold, maybe strong-armed, right?
Yes,
I don't know all the stories.
Right.
So they have a genuine concern. When we talk about expanding these uses in our public lands, Buffalo River only has a certain amount of carrying capacity. At some point, it's going to be, like I say, loved to death one Chaco-clad foot at a time. It's going to be beat to death one Chaco-clad foot at a time. If we just keep pumping people in, because the numbers aren't correct, I'll put you that way. There's more people coming here than what they say. I've watched the surveys and I've seen how they do the surveys.
How many do you think there are?
Well, I'd say there's definitely over 2 million people a year. I may be wrong. It's more than they're capturing. I do know that.
The Buffalo River officially reported 1.5 million visitors last year. It certainly gets crowded. In fact, a prospectus that would have changed the way canoe rental outfitters shuttle clients and visitors this summer was stymied because it could have created too much congestion at the river's access points where parking is limited. Westerman learned about that concern in his November the 6th lunch at the Jasper Cafe with Billy Bell and a group of Buffalo National concessioners. Westerman went back to D.C. with that info, shared it with the Park Service, and it backed off the plan for now. River area locals also learned about the possible redesignation of the Buffalo from a national river to a national park preserve last year when results of a resident survey gauging interest in the redesignation was reported on in the fall. Folks who live in 5 counties were surveyed, and the numbers came back favorable, 64% for redesignation. Bell and others believe the survey was skewed. 9 people from Searcy County and 9 people from Newton County were polled. The majority of the Buffalo's 153 miles stretches through those 2 counties. So, 7% of people polled were Bell's neighbors in Newton County, while close to 50% surveyed were from Baxter County, where the river just clips its southwestern corner.
And I don't know that it was skewed on purpose, but it was just strange that Newton and Searcy counties are where the vast majority of the river flow through.
Yep.
We got the smallest survey group from there. Baxter County also has probably the highest per capita people not from here, right, that are going to look at it totally different than those that are from here.
A lot of Chicago folks
Yeah.
over in Mountain Home.
Yeah.
And very little of the Buffalo River.
10%, something like that. Yeah. So I feel like the results were skewed, and then, like I said, the propaganda was definitely false. So all the people that are coming in here with the money that can buy it, they're retired. They're not bringing any kids to schools. That's not helping the school out a whole lot. So it does make me worry about what will actually happen to these rural schools, what will actually happen to these rural towns. We live here because it is what it is. There's a common misconception that we just don't know that there's more money to be made. Well, guess what? We all know that there's more money to be made, but we choose to sacrifice so that our families can grow up the way that we grew up, so that our families can enjoy the outdoors the way that most people will never have the opportunity.
That's Billy Bell, and this is AgriCulture, a podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau. Arkansas Farm Bureau passed policy in November opposing the changing of the name, designation, or expansion of the Buffalo National River and any further negative impact on the agricultural lands or infringement on private land ownership and its use within the Buffalo National River watershed. I want to thank Billy Bell, a lifelong Newton County resident and a guy who spent most of his vocational career working on or near the river. Please join us on our next episode of AgriCulture, when we'll talk with Bob Schaffner, a farmer from Bentonville who has seen thousands of acres transformed by development.
The thing that a lot of people maybe not understand is, to a lot of these folks, they want to develop this. They think that's a noble cause. They're looking for things down the road to preserve it. But as we have more tourism, there's a lot more demand. When you tell me that there's 1.7 million or whatever the factors are, that's a lot of demand on that watershed.
And we'll talk with Susan Halstead from Marshall, who says her grandparents were ushered off their farm in 1972 by armed U.S. Marshals.
You know, free market economy, if you want to sell your place and you have a buyer and you all agree to it, that's great. That's part of the American way. But when you're told or forced to remove from a piece of property that you don't want to sell, that's a different story.
As a kid, I just remember all the good memories. I've been on the river with my grandparents. She didn't want to live in town. And she just was not happy here. She'd sit there in her recliner. She was in total disbelief that could happen. And I feel like that is exactly what happened to them. They died of a broken heart.
Welcome to AgriCulture, Life Stories from the Farm, a podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau. I'm Chad Hoop. Located on the banks of the Buffalo River, Jasper, Arkansas is a town of about 400. So when 1,200 folks packed Jasper's community center in late October, they made some noise and headlines. Angry, concerned, scared. Residents with land and farms and family ties had just learned about another possible redesignation of the Buffalo. The first happened in 1972 when it became America's first national river. Now, outsiders and big money people, as the locals call them, are reportedly aiming to make the Buffalo a national park preserve, creating more tourism and federal funding for the area and towns like Jasper.
I hate it. I hate it for my friends that are going to be affected. I see it. And it's like I told them, you got so much to lose. We all do. If they do this.
Susan Halstead lives near Marshall in Searcy County. She rarely visits the river these days, but loved being on the Buffalo as a little girl in the 1960s. The river ran right next to her grandparents' farm until it was redesignated in '72 and armed U.S. Marshals removed her grandparents from the land. I recently met Halstead at a house just 3 blocks from Marshall's downtown square, where her grandparents were forced to move and live their final years. Halstead was passionate talking about the past and another possible redesignation of the Buffalo.
To add more tourism to it, I think the people need to fight that. Buffalo can't handle it. There's not enough water to float the people that are there as it is now. It's just like they need to take a number, you know. Then again, that's regulating what they said they weren't going to do. They'll do whatever they want to do. I seen what happened to my grandparents.
Do you remember coming back? Your dad decided to leave and you guys moved out of state for work and to get away from the conflict, you felt like, and your grandparents stayed here. And then they were evicted. The U.S. Marshals came. Do you remember coming back and the first time you saw your grandparents, was it in this house here in downtown just off of the square in Marshall?
Yes. I remember coming back and it was different. We've always been on the farm. As a kid, I just remember all the good memories of being on the river with my grandparents. And she just was not happy here. She'd sit there in her recliner. I think it was a short time. She just willed herself down to nothing and died. And I know that's what it was. She didn't want to live in town. And here we are. I just don't see anything good coming out of this new proposal they have. I don't see it benefiting Searcy County in any aspect or way, or the buffalo. The farmers have a hard enough time with what they're going to dictate to them, what they can plant. You know, and for the people who are in the watershed, I really feel for them because they're going to have a fight and a battle. People need to get behind them. And it's so sad, their family cemeteries, they won't even let you drive a vehicle up to them.
Which is the greater hurt, losing the land or seeing what has happened to the river, and what would your counsel be for people who might be facing change again?
Losing the land was devastating, but seeing what's happened to the buffalo is disgraceful to see it in the shape it is today. And what I'd say to people looking at it today under the proposal, I really don't know the answer to that other than just say, not just no, but hell no. It's just not right. We need to get behind the people and really save the buffalo, because that's what they were doing in the 70s. That was the slogan back in the 60s. Whenever they'd done that little float trip down there, they looked around, oh, we need to save the buffalo.
Who's they?
That was the congressman that came down with Sierra Club, I think. I don't know, I was young at the time. They came down, looked around, we need to save the buffalo. Today, we need to save the buffalo. The buffalo needs to be saved from these people who don't understand. And I feel like it's the same people 50 years ago who wanted to save the buffalo that are wanted to exploit it even more. Going to be dictated on what you can and can't do because it's in the watershed. Well, sorry, you can't use that fertilizer. Sorry, you're going to build a fence there. You got to have, you can't put a pond. I'm just saying, because they're going to dictate to you what you can and can't do. Back to it, no, I don't think they know what's going to hit them.
Susan, everyone in Arkansas knows about the Buffalo River. There's more and more people, depending on what time of year you come. So this affects more than the residents, but it really impacts y'all. What would you like for the rest of Arkansas to know about what has happened to the buffalo since you were 10 or 11 years old in 1972 and it became America's first national river?
The route they're going, we're not going to have a buffalo for long. We used to have a big mighty buffalo. It was called the Big Mighty Buffalo. Now it's just a little stream. And when you open it up to more tourism, what are they going to float? Barely get an inner tube down at some places.
Where are they going to use the bathroom?
Well, we already know. I wasn't going to bring that up. Exactly. When you go back to everything the park has tried to take away from everyone's way of being and trying to make a living, such as the controversial hog farm, they managed to shut that down. But what do you think is flowing into the Buffalo now, and you got all these, and I want to think, did I read something, an article the other day, there was 1 million or plus people visited the Buffalo?
That's right.
Well, where do you think they're going? They're not just standing out in water to chill out, you know, I don't know, but we have come so far in 50 years, the locals have. And now, here they are, they're ripping off the Band-Aid, and we're just all in a tiff again. It's just heart-wrenching to see it happen.
That's longtime Searcy County resident Susan Halstead. About 130 miles west, Bob Schaffner is one of the last cattle farmers left in booming northwest Arkansas.
We are blessed to be in northwest Arkansas, but at the same time, if you want to continue or expand your farming operations, you have a big challenge.
Schaffner lives in nearby Bentonville, where his wife grew up and home of the world's largest retailer, Walmart. Schaffner's farm is located just west of Bentonville near Centerton. I went to see it, his cattle, and talk about the challenges he and others, like the folks along the Buffalo River, face when development moves in.
Boy, you got some good sturdy looking cows here, Bob. How much pasture do you have here just west of Bentonville?
Just my original farm here, we just have 40 acres here on the home place. You know, we had some other acreages, and of course, we also used to operate a apple and peach orchard, and northwest Arkansas is continuing to grow, and pressures on agricultural, so we, you know, multi-generation farmers just trying to still eke out a living on these old hills and rocks. I mean, chicken litter has helped us grow some grass so we can raise some cows. It's not the best soil in the world, but
you got some good looking, I can tell you got some thick, lush grass, but only 40 acres, and just about every direction I look here, back off to the west and north here, I see subdivisions all around you.
Unfortunately, there's a few counties in the state that are really fighting the urban rural, you know, interface or sprawl or whatever you want to talk about it.
You said generational land a minute ago. So it means more than just having a place to raise your cattle. And as I visit with people on the Buffalo River, that's what means a lot to them. And they're fearful the same thing that's closing in on you here might happen there in a different way.
What a lot of people don't realize, or the general public doesn't realize, farming or ranching, you're working with the soil, you're working with the land, you're working with the animals, and that's how you make your living. And it's a very close bond. It's just part of that DNA, I guess. You know, people want to be there. That's what they chose to do, to be able to produce food and fiber and fuel for the country and for the world. You know, it's a noble cause.
That's Bob Schaffner, a cattle farmer in booming Bentonville. As we continued to visit, Schaffner wanted to share his thoughts on some of the people who are proposing new things for the buffalo.
Obviously, if there's long-term goals that certain people are wanting to do, I think the community and the public need to understand that. And we have to have, you know, there will be growth, but it's got to be kind of controlled. And then at the same time, people have got to understand the economics of their place and what's the long-range goal. And being forthcoming gives everybody a little better idea of what's going on. The thing that a lot of people maybe not understand is, to a lot of these folks, they want to develop this. They think that's a noble cause. They're looking for things down the road to preserve it. But also, too, as we have more tourism, there's a lot more demand. You know, they talk about pressures to the Buffalo River itself, the algae blooms. So there's a whole lot of things. When you tell me that there's 1.7 million or whatever the factors are, and that's a lot of demand on that watershed.
You've got these nice black Angus here, and I think I see a red, is that a red Angus over there? And on these rolling hills, and then I mentioned, you know, we got these 2- and 3-story brick nice homes around you here. But in northwest Arkansas, here west of Bentonville, what would you say as a mediator between people on the Buffalo and people in other places that want to make it more of a tourism thing?
Well, you know, obviously change is constant, so you can't ever say that something's going to stay the same. Everybody just needs to understand and the right to know what's going on in a public venue, particularly if it involves right of eminent domain or changing the way things are, or if I'm in a farming operation and all of a sudden I get zoned and say you can't run cows on this particular piece of property. So the ag community or the farming community is very wary. You know, as the old saying goes, you want to be a seat at the table instead of on the table being the consumed. And I think that's the part that most rural people would like, is a better seat at the table to have more communication and dialogue.
That's Mr. Bob Schaffner from Bentonville. I want to thank Bob for sharing his insights on the different ideas and perspectives on developing rural areas like those along the Buffalo River. And thank you to Susan Halstead from Searcy County for sitting and sharing with us her heart and childhood recollections of the river. Arkansas Farm Bureau passed policy in November opposing the changing of the name, designation, or expansion of the Buffalo National River and any further negative impact on the agricultural lands or infringement on private land ownership and its use within the Buffalo National River watershed. On our next episode of AgriCulture, we'll visit with Randy Gibbons, who is the great-grandson of the last lady evicted from the Buffalo River 50 years ago, Eva Henderson, famously known just as Granny.
My ancestor kept the river pure. What I don't trust is when they start trying to change. They're saying they're going to change it to make it better. I have never seen that happen.
It will be our finale of a 5-part series on the Buffalo, its past and future. That's next time on AgriCulture.
You know, she wanted to live her life out right there because that was her life, living on the river. I know most people wouldn't enjoy that type of lifestyle, but she did.
No running water?
No running water, basically, no electricity, but that was her life. You'd go down there and she'd have her dog and her chickens, her cows, and very simple. When we'd go visit, I enjoyed it so much.
Eva Barnes Henderson, better known as Granny Henderson, might have been the toughest lady to ever live in the Ozarks.
She had a mastectomy and she never did fully heal up.
So she was always wearing a bandage or
She'd
something?
always wear a wrap or a bandage and
do all that farm work, carry around bales of hay and
oh yes, and
with a hole in her chest.
Yeah, and she'd carry water from the buffalo up to water her cows. Yes, she could do it all.
Welcome to AgriCulture, a national award-winning podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau. I'm Chad Hooten. She lived on the banks of the river for almost all of her 87 years and enjoying it all until she was forced to move when the Buffalo was redesignated as America's first national river. Granny was the last to go, the last person displaced when her land for more than 80 years was acquired by the National Park Service. She died shortly after.
Back in '72, I don't think people really realized what was going to happen.
Randy Gibbons is the great-grandson of the famous Granny Henderson. We recently met with him on the banks of the Little Buffalo at Bradley Park near the square in Jasper. He talked about his great-granny, Granny Henderson, but we mostly talked about the new hot topic in town of less than 500. More changes possibly ahead for the Buffalo River and the land surrounding it. For Gibbons, all the talks about redesignating or rebranding the Buffalo from a national river to a national park and preserve stirs up heart-wrenching memories from a half-century ago.
I graduated in 1972. When I first started hearing about it when I was a teenager, you know, I had no idea that it really come to pass like that.
Your great-grandmother was the last one displaced from the river.
As far as I know, she was the last one. I know on this part of the river she was, yes.
Tell me what you remember about that day or that time when that happened to your great-grandmother.
Well, you know, she wanted to live her life out right there because that was her life, living on the river. I know most people wouldn't enjoy that type of lifestyle, but she did. Very simple. When we'd go visit, I enjoyed it so much. That was different from what lifestyle I was even used to.
What was your favorite part, or what do you remember about visiting the famous Granny Henderson on the Buffalo?
She's always positive, always gets so much energy. She just loved life. And I never seen her have a sad moment, seemed like.
But she couldn't stop the redesignation of the Buffalo.
No,
People back then, I just don't think they really realized that she would be moved out and lose her land and lose her home. They just didn't really understand. And I think that's a problem right now on what's going on. At the meeting, it proved. We don't trust the outsiders coming in here trying to tell us how to run the river. They come in, they try to tell you what you can, you can't do.
That's Randy Gibbons, the great-grandson of Eva Henderson, the Buffalo River's legendary granny. Gibbons was one of about 1,200 who attended a meeting last October at Jasper Community Center. It was a quickly organized meeting after area newspapers reported folks who don't live on the river were possibly making plans to change it from a national river to a national park and preserve.
My ancestor kept the river pure. The river is not the same as it was in '72 now.
So you don't trust the, quote, outsiders, as the locals call them, because of the history?
What I don't trust is when they start trying to change what we have had. And they're saying they're going to change it to make it better. I have never seen that happen.
Other folks that we've talked to have said that was a promise in '72. We're going to make it better.
It hasn't happened. It's not going to happen.
You've seen things going on for months and maybe even years leading up to the meeting here at the Jasper Community Center. You've seen activity leading up to this.
Right up where I live, Buffalo Outdoor Center has got several cabins through there. They've got a trailer park. They have started a bicycle trail right in front of my home. Got a zip line. I've seen a lot of changes in just the last 10 years. You know, the property up in my area has just escalated, the value of the property. And the reason is we have so much tourism right now, and we don't have the roads, which you can drive these roads right now and see, really handle a whole lot more tourism than what we have unless we make some improvements.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think they're wanting to make some changes, but I really believe there's enough local people now in support to see the local people now is going to fight hard from taking our property.
A redesignation of the Buffalo River. We had one in '72. Locals didn't like it. What would you say to all of the people now about making it, instead of a national river now, making it a national park preserve?
What is the purpose of changing the designation? There got to be some future changes that they're looking at to be made in order for them to be pushing to do this, because we've already got the national river. If you change the designation, then they have the avenue already in place that they can make these changes, and the local people can't do anything about it.
Randy, let's walk down here by this river. I want to see this little white capping going on. I see. Might be a fish waiting for a bug to come floating off of that shoal, you know? Looking to see if I see any deer or maybe an elk track in here. I don't see any elk, do you?
Not here, but over at my place you'll see a lot of elk.
Is that right?
Yeah.
But these islands and this buildup, you mentioned earlier you would go and you would find the deep holes where the big fish would be, and those have just about disappeared.
Yeah, on Big Buffalo especially.
They used to take gravel out of the river and use it on the roads to repair the county roads and stuff, and that would allow the water to flush out a lot of the trash and stuff that was in there. Now that that's no longer happening, the river's filling in. It's getting wider and shallower.
I don't even canoe anymore because the type of water I want to float, there's so many people on it, you can enjoy it. But when I was a kid, you could put in and you wouldn't even hardly have to touch your paddle all the way down the river. Now it's all filled in, you know, it gets nothing like it was.
And that's because of the redesignation?
Yeah, when in '72 when they took over a national river.
50 years ago.
And that's what I fear, a lot more of that is going to take place on a wider scale.
That's Randy Gibbons from Newton County, the great-grandson of the famous Eva Granny Henderson, arguably the grittiest granny to ever live in the Ozark Mountains. And this is AgriCulture, a national award-winning podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau. I'm Chad Hooten. Arkansas Farm Bureau passed policy in November opposing the changing of the name, designation, or expansion of the Buffalo National River and any further negative impact on the agricultural lands or infringement on private land ownership and its use within the Buffalo National River watershed.
There are some folks from the outside who hear you and know what you're saying and understand and feel for you. Can those people help the locals in Jasper and Boxley and Marshall and Hasty?
Oh yes, we definitely need their help. And when I say outsiders, I'm not meaning degrading in any way. Because we love to have tourists, but we don't want our homes taken. We enjoy people enjoying the river, but just don't change it. Don't take it away from us. And the people, if they'll just understand what us local people is going, we enjoy you, but don't take our home from us.
How can people who don't live here help the people who do live on the Buffalo?
Contract our congressmen and senators, and if they bring out a bill, make it plain where the people, local people, can understand. I want to know, if you'll tell me plain out, this is the way it's going to be. Everything is in the dark to us. Why change the designation? What is the purpose? What is the true purpose in doing that?
Here, obviously, we're in the watershed. We're 10 feet from the river here, but about 70% of this county is in the watershed.
Yes.
It's possible a redesignation could claim 70% of the county.
Definitely. If you take the White River watershed, you have got Osage, you've got Kings River, you've got Buffalo, you've got Little Buffalo, you've got it all. You're talking about all of these streams, and you're taking our whole county. Not just our county, you're taking Kings River down at Kingston. A lot of that area being bought up by outsiders now. I'm old enough, I'm 69-year-old. Be honest with you, I really don't think it's going to affect me. But my kids and my grandkids, that's where the change is going to be.
That's Randy Gibbons, who lives near Jasper and has fond memories of floating the Buffalo River as a child, including visits to his great-grandparents' home on the river's bank. But Gibbons also has sad memories of when his great-grandmother, Granny Henderson, had to move in 1972 because her land was claimed by the National Park Service. So I want to thank Randy for sharing and encouraging others to get involved. Also, thank you to all the fine folks who visited with us during this series focused on the Buffalo River. The talks seem to have quieted a bit since last fall, but most who live in the area believe battling to stop more changes on the Buffalo will never end. Arkansas Farm Bureau's policy is to oppose any changes. And we'll be back if new developments warrant another episode. Please be sure to like, share, tell others, and sign up for AgriCulture wherever you get your podcast. I'm Chad Hooten. Thanks for listening to AgriCulture, a national award-winning podcast from Arkansas Farm Bureau.